The wind carried dust across the empty settlement. Ethan pushed the door of his small outpost cabin and stepped outside. His life on the colony world was quiet. Too quiet. He worked in the nearby station, repairing machines that no one else cared to fix. Every evening he returned to his cabin, cooked a simple meal, and ate alone. Silence was his only companion. That evening, as the twin suns sank behind the rocky hills, Ethan noticed movement near the edge of the settlement. At first he thought it was a shadow, or maybe one of the native animals. But then he saw her, a figure, thin and tired, walking slowly toward him. She was not human. Her skin had a soft silver glow under the fading light. Her hair shimmered faintly as though it carried threads of light within it. Her eyes, large, dark, and full of emotion, stared at him with a mix of fear and hope. Ethan froze. He had seen aliens before, but never here, never this close to his home. Most aliens avoided human colonies, and humans often avoided them in return. This one looked young, fragile, almost broken. She carried nothing but a small pouch at her side. Her steps were unsteady, yet she did not fall. She stopped a few meters away. The air between them felt heavy. Ethan raised his hand slowly. "Hello," he said. His voice was cautious, gentle. The girl tilted her head. She opened her mouth as if to answer, but no sound came. Only silence. She tried again, but only a whisper escaped, a sound too soft to understand. Her silence made Ethan uneasy. He wondered if she was hurt, lost, or running from something. But her eyes spoke louder than her voice. They carried a simple plea, one that anyone could read. "Help. Are you hungry?" Ethan asked. He pointed toward his cabin. She followed his gesture with her eyes. Then she gave the smallest nod, barely visible, but enough. Ethan stepped back and motioned for her to follow. Inside his cabin, the smell of old metal and dried herbs mixed together. It was not a place of comfort, just survival. He placed a small pan on the stove and started preparing some rations. The girl sat quietly on a chair, her eyes watching his every move. She did not speak. She hardly moved. Only her fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the pouch she carried. When Ethan placed the food in front of her, she did not eat. Instead, she raised her hand slowly and shook her head. Then she pointed to the pan, to the herbs, and then to herself. Ethan frowned, confused. "You want to cook?" he asked. The girl gave a soft nod. For the first time, a flicker of life lit her face. She touched her chest and then pointed to the food. It was not a word, but the meaning was clear. "Let me try." Ethan hesitated. He had never let a stranger, much less an alien stranger, handle his food. But something in her eyes told him she was not dangerous, only desperate. He stepped aside, handing her the spoon. She moved with care. Her hands, though thin, were steady. She opened her pouch and brought out a small vial filled with strange glowing spice. The color was deep green with a shimmer like crushed emeralds. She sprinkled it gently over the pan, then stirred with slow, deliberate motions. The air began to change. A new scent filled the room. Rich, sweet, and strangely calming. Ethan stood frozen, watching. The simple rations he had thrown together now smelled like something from another world. The girl worked silently, her expression calm, focused. Her silence no longer felt empty. It felt powerful, as if her cooking was her true language. When she finished, she stepped back and nodded toward the plate. Ethan looked at her, then at the food. He took a small bite. The taste exploded across his tongue. Warm, deep, unlike anything he had ever eaten in his life. His heart raced. He stared at her in disbelief. The girl lowered her eyes, as if waiting for rejection. Instead, Ethan whispered, "This is amazing." She looked up, and for the first time, the corner of her lips lifted, a small, fragile smile. Ethan felt something stir inside him. This girl, silent and strange, had stepped into his empty world and changed it with a single meal. He did not know her story. He did not know her name. But he knew one thing. This was only the beginning. Outside, the night settled over the colony. The stars burned bright. And in the small cabin, two lives that had been strangers only an hour ago had taken the first step towards something greater. The cabin was quiet. Ethan sat at the table, his eyes still fixed on the empty plate. The alien girl had transformed his dull meal into something unforgettable. He wanted to ask her questions, but when he looked up, He saw her sitting still, hands folded, eyes lowered. She looked like someone waiting for judgment. Ethan cleared his throat. "That was incredible," he said softly. She glanced at him, and for a moment her eyes brightened. But then she looked away again. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but only a faint sound came, a whisper that faded before it reached him. He leaned forward. "You don't talk much, do you?" he asked gently. She shook her head, a quick motion, almost ashamed. Ethan realized her silence wasn't choice. It was pain. He could see it in the way her shoulders tightened, in the way she avoided his gaze. "All right," Ethan said, forcing a small smile. "Talking isn't everything." He tapped the table. "Food like that speaks plenty." The girl's eyes softened. She placed her hand over the pouch at her side, as if guarding the small vials within. The night stretched on. Outside, the colony lights flickered in the distance. The settlement was a place of machines, wires, and tired workers. No one laughed here. No one smiled. Ethan wondered how someone like her had ended up in such a cold world. The girl rose from her chair. She moved toward the small stove, her fingers brushing across the metal surface. She turned to him and pointed at the pan. Ethan tilted his head. "You want to cook again?" She gave the smallest nod. Ethan chuckled. "You don't waste time, do you?" He stepped aside. She opened her pouch again, pulling out another tiny container. This one held something like dried petals, glowing faintly blue. She sprinkled them over the leftover broth, and the air filled with a scent like rain on warm stone. Ethan inhaled deeply, his chest loosening. He sat back, watching her work. She moved silently, yet every motion told a story. Her cooking was not just survival. It was art, and though she spoke no words, he began to understand her language. When the dish was ready, she served it with care. Ethan tasted it. His throat tightened. It reminded him of home. Earth, long ago, before he left. Somehow, this alien girl had taken him back to a memory he thought was gone. He looked at her in awe. "How? How do you do this?" he whispered. The girl only placed her hand on her chest. Then she touched the table, her meaning simple. "I give you what is in me." Ethan swallowed hard. A strange warmth spread inside him, not just from the food, but from her presence. Hours passed. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt alive, like a conversation made of gestures, looks, and the language of meals. Ethan realized he wasn't lonely anymore, not tonight. As the fire in the stove dimmed, Ethan leaned back. He studied the girl. Her silver skin reflected the faint light, her dark eyes watching the shadows. She looked both fragile and unbreakable at once. Who was she? Why had she come here? Questions filled his mind, but he knew she couldn't answer them. Not yet. Then, outside, a sharp sound cut the night, a metallic echo from the settlement streets. The girl stiffened, her eyes widened. She clutched her pouch tightly. Ethan stood quickly, hand on the tool he kept by the door. He listened. The sound faded, but the tension remained. He turned to her. "Are you running from something?" he asked. His voice was low, serious. The girl did not reply, but her silence was enough. Her hands trembled. Her eyes avoided his. Ethan's chest tightened. Whatever her story was, it was not simple. He walked back to the table. "Listen," he said slowly. "I don't know what happened to you, but you're safe here tonight." He pointed to the spare cot in the corner. "Rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure it out." She hesitated, then nodded. She moved to the cot, laying down carefully, still holding her pouch close. She curled into herself. Ethan watched her for a long time. The alien girl, silent and strange, had brought something into his life he never expected. Hope. As he dimmed the light and settled into his own bed, Ethan whispered to himself, "Who are you really?" Outside, the night stretched cold and long, but inside the small cabin, two different souls shared the same fragile peace. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was the beginning of something neither of them could name. Morning came slowly on the colony. The light of the twin suns slipped through the cracks in the cabin walls. Ethan rubbed his tired eyes and sat up. He glanced across the room. The alien girl was already awake, sitting quietly on the edge of the cot, clutching her pouch close as always. She noticed him watching and lowered her gaze. Ethan gave her a small smile. "Morning," he said softly. She nodded once, but did not reply. Her silence lingered. but he had grown used to it. There was something peaceful in the way she moved without words. Ethan prepared to head out for his work shift at the repair station, but when he reached for the door, he paused. Something felt different. He turned and saw her standing near the stove, her hand resting on the pan. She looked at him with questioning eyes. "You want to cook again?" Ethan asked. She gave the smallest nod. Ethan hesitated, glancing at the time. He was already running late, but curiosity pulled stronger than duty. He set down his tools and waved toward the stove. "All right, show me what you've got." She opened her pouch and revealed another vial. This one held a golden powder, faintly glowing like dust caught in sunlight. She sprinkled it carefully into the pan, then added a few dried herbs Ethan had stored away. The air changed almost instantly. A rich, sweet aroma filled the cabin, drifting through every corner like a gentle song. Ethan sat down, drawn by the scent. He watched her stir slowly, her movements calm and practiced. There was grace in the way she cooked, as if each motion was deliberate, almost ceremonial. This was no ordinary meal. This was her voice, her story. When she finished, she placed the food in front of him. Her hands trembled slightly, as if afraid he might reject it. Ethan looked at her, then at the dish. He picked up the spoon and took a bite. The taste hit him with a force he did not expect. Warm, layered, alive with flavors he couldn't describe. It wasn't just food. It was memory. It reminded him of sitting at his mother's table back on Earth, of laughter, of warmth he thought he had left behind forever. His chest tightened. His eyes stung with emotion he hadn't felt in years. He set the spoon down slowly, staring at the plate. The girl's eyes searched his face. Waiting, Ethan swallowed hard. This is incredible," he whispered. She blinked, her lips parting in surprise. Then she lowered her gaze, hiding the faintest smile. Ethan leaned forward. "How do you know these flavors? You've never been to Earth." She shook her head gently, placing her hand over her chest again. Then she touched the food. The meaning was simple. "I give you what is inside me." Ethan's throat tightened. He realized she wasn't just feeding his body. She was touching something deeper. Her cooking was more than skill. It was connection. For a moment, silence wrapped the cabin. But this silence was not heavy. It was warm. Ethan could hear the hum of the stove, the faint crackle of spice against the pan, and the quiet beat of his own heart. Then, outside, a knock echoed against the cabin door, a sharp, unfriendly sound. The girl froze, her eyes wide with fear. She clutched her pouch tightly. Ethan frowned, rising to his feet. Few people ever visited him, and those who did never knocked like that. He opened the door cautiously. Two men from the settlement stood there, rough workers with tired faces. "We smelled something." One of them said, "Food." The second man sniffed the air, his eyes narrowing. "Not human food." Ethan blocked the doorway. "What do you want?" he asked firmly. The men exchanged a look. "Word is, you've got company," the taller one said. "An alien." Ethan's jaw tightened. Behind him, the girl shifted nervously. Her pouch rattled faintly as her fingers gripped it. He could feel her fear filling the room. "Leave," Ethan said coldly. The men didn't move. Suspicion burned in their eyes. "Aliens don't belong here," one muttered. "They bring trouble." The words hung in the air like poison. Ethan's fists clenched. He thought of the girl's cooking, of the way she had brought life into his empty world. "She's not trouble," he said firmly. "She's my guest." The men sneered, but finally stepped back. "Watch yourself, Ethan," the tall one warned. "This colony has rules." Then they turned and walked away, their voices fading into the dusty streets. Ethan closed the door with a heavy breath. He turned to the girl. She stood still, her body tense, eyes wide with fear. He softened his tone. "It's all right," he said gently. "They're gone." She lowered her gaze, still clutching the pouch. Ethan stepped closer. "You're safe here," he promised. For the first time, she met his eyes, and in that silent look, Ethan felt a bond forming, fragile but real. The meal still sat on the table, but it no longer tasted just of spices. It carried something deeper, the start of trust. The girl barely spoke, but Ethan understood. Her food was her language. The night settled heavy over the colony. Ethan sat by the dim light of a lantern, fixing a broken tool with tired hands. Across the room, the alien girl sat near the cot, her pouch held close against her chest. Her dark eyes followed the shadows on the wall, distant and heavy. Ethan glanced at her often. His mind burned with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why did she carry those glowing spices as if they were treasure? He knew she would not answer with words, but maybe she would answer in another way. Finally, he set the tool aside. You don't have to tell me everything, he said gently, but I want to understand. The girl looked at him, her lips parting. A sound escaped, broken, faint, a whisper of syllables he could not make out. She shook her head, frustration flickering across her face. Instead, she opened the pouch slowly. Her thin fingers pulled out 3 small vials. Each held a different spice. Emerald dust, blue petals, golden powder. She set them carefully on the table. Then, with trembling hands, she pointed to each in turn. Her eyes spoke as much as her gestures. Ethan leaned forward, watching. She pressed her hand against the emerald dust vial. Her face tightened. She lifted her other hand, clenched it into a fist, then struck her chest softly. Her message was clear. Pain, rejection. She lowered her gaze. Next, she touched the vial of blue petals. Her expression softened. Her eyes filled with sorrow. She cupped her hands together as if holding something fragile. Then she let her fingers fall open, showing emptiness. Ethan understood. She had lost something or someone. Finally, she placed her hand on the golden powder. For the first time, her lips curved faintly upward, a fragile smile. She tapped her chest and then tapped the vial. Ethan realized. This was hope, the last piece she carried. He sat back slowly, his heart heavy. Her story was not told in words but in flavors, in spices, in silence. She had been cast out, had lost something precious, but she still carried hope in the form of her cooking. Your people, Ethan said quietly. They didn't want you, did they? The girl froze, then nodded once. Her eyes glistened in the lantern light. She pressed her hand against her lips, then lowered it, shaking her head. She could not speak, or she had been silenced. Ethan's chest tightened. Anger flared inside him. He had seen humans reject each other often, but to cast out someone for being different, for being quiet, for choosing to cook instead of fight, it was cruel. The girl carefully pushed the vials back into her pouch, as if hiding her heart away again. Then she reached for the pan. She poured a small measure of each spice together, mixing pain, sorrow, and hope. The smell that rose was sharp and bittersweet. Ethan tasted it when she placed the dish before him. The flavor struck deep, rich and complex. It was her story on a plate. Ethan swallowed hard. His voice was rough when he spoke. You don't have to prove yourself here, he said. Not to me. The girl met his eyes. Her silence spoke louder than any word. For the first time, she raised her trembling hand and touched the edge of his sleeve. A small gesture. Almost nothing. But to Ethan, it was everything. A silent thank you. A fragile trust. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Ethan leaned back, lost in thought. The colony outside was filled with suspicion. He knew others would not accept her. They would not taste her food. They would not see her story. They would only see an alien. But Ethan saw more. He saw a soul who had suffered rejection, who carried pain and sorrow, but who still dared to bring warmth into a stranger's home. He saw strength hidden in silence. That night, as sleep slowly pulled him under, Ethan made a quiet vow. He would protect her. He would give her a place where she would never be cast out again. And across the room, the alien girl lay awake, watching the lantern fade. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone. The following days passed slowly. The colony lived in its usual rhythm. Machines breaking, workers repairing, silence filling the air. But inside Ethan's cabin, life was no longer the same. The alien girl, though still silent, moved through his space as if she had always belonged there. Each morning, she cooked. She took his dull rations and turned them into meals that felt alive. Ethan found himself looking forward to returning home from the repair station, not for rest, but for the warm glow of flavor and the quiet presence waiting for him. She never said much, only small whispers or broken sounds. But her eyes carried meaning. Her hands spoke when words could not. She placed dishes before him with care, and through them, she told her story again and again. Sometimes her food carried sadness, sometimes comfort, sometimes hope. Ethan began to understand her language more than he understood human speech. One evening, as the twin suns set and painted the sky in fire, Ethan sat at the table. He had just tasted another of her meals. Rich, soothing, filled with a calm sweetness that lingered. He leaned back, staring at her in wonder. "You know," he said slowly, "I think you're teaching me something." The girl tilted her head, watching him. "You're teaching me that silence isn't empty," Ethan said with a soft smile. "It's full, if you listen." Her lips curved faintly, the ghost of a smile, and she lowered her eyes shyly. That night, after the meal, Ethan fixed a broken lantern while she sat nearby. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a tiny pinch of glowing spice. Without a word, she sprinkled it into the flame. The lantern glowed brighter, softer, filling the cabin with warmth. Ethan stared at it, then at her. "You even fixed the light," he whispered. Their bond grew quietly, not through long talks or grand gestures, but through small actions, shared meals, steady glances, the comfort of presence. Ethan no longer felt the crushing weight of loneliness. He had someone to come home to, someone who turned his empty walls into something close to home. But the colony outside was not blind. The two men who had visited earlier spread whispers. Soon others began to notice the scents drifting from Ethan's cabin. They grew curious, then suspicious. No human meals had ever smelled like that, and no one liked the thought of something different in their midst. One evening, as Ethan walked back from the repair station, he noticed 3 colonists standing outside his cabin. They whispered among themselves, glancing at the door. When Ethan approached, they stepped aside slowly, pretending they weren't watching. His jaw tightened. He knew trouble was coming. Inside, the girl stood by the stove, cooking. When she saw his face, her expression shifted. She could sense the tension. Ethan forced a smile. "Don't worry," he said softly. "They won't touch you. Not while I'm here." Still, her hands shook as she stirred. She knew too well what rejection looked like, what fear tasted like. She had lived it before, and she feared living it again. That night, after the meal, Ethan sat across from her. He leaned forward, voice low. "I don't care what they think," he said. "You belong here." She looked at him, her eyes wide. Her silence stretched, but tears glimmered faintly before she quickly wiped them away. Ethan reached across the table, placing his hand gently near hers. She did not pull away this time. For a long moment, they sat in quiet stillness, a fragile bond stronger than words. The girl rose and began preparing something else. She mixed the golden powder with the blue petals, creating a dish Ethan had never seen before. The smell filled the cabin with warmth and comfort. When he tasted it, his heart tightened. It felt like family. He realized then that she was not only giving him food, she was giving him pieces of herself, of everything she had lost. She was creating something new between them, a bond that was deeper than words. Outside, whispers turned sharper, suspicion grew louder, but inside the small cabin, something rare was forming, a trust, a connection, a beginning of belonging. And Ethan knew, no matter what came next, he would fight to protect it. The colony's whispers grew sharper with each passing day. People smelled the strange spices, saw the soft glow from Ethan's windows, and suspicion turned into anger. Humans on this world had little comfort, and anything unknown became a threat. One evening, Ethan returned from the repair station to find a crowd outside his cabin. 5 men and 2 women stood there, arms crossed, faces hard. At their center was the tall man who had warned him before. His voice rang out as Ethan approached. "We gave you a warning, and you ignored it." Ethan's stomach tightened. He pushed through the crowd to his door. "This is my home," he said firmly. "You don't get to decide who I share it with." The tall man sneered. "She's an alien," he spat. "We don't know what she is, what she carries, what danger she brings." Murmurs of agreement rose from the others. "She doesn't belong here." Inside, the alien girl stood frozen by the stove, clutching her pouch tightly. Her eyes darted toward Ethan as he entered, fear shining in them. Ethan raised his hand, signaling for her to stay calm. He turned back to the crowd. "She hasn't hurt anyone," Ethan said. "She's not a threat. She only cooks." His words sparked laughter, bitter and cruel. One woman stepped forward. "You risked the whole colony for a cook," she scoffed. Ethan's jaw tightened. He felt anger rising. He remembered the first meal she made, the way her food had carried hope, sorrow, and strength. He remembered the bond forming in silence. Her food does more than feed, he said firmly. It heals. The tall man shoved forward. We don't care about your feelings, Ethan. She goes, or we make her go. His words struck like a blade. The crowd shifted, closer now. Behind Ethan, the girl's hands shook. She opened her pouch and pulled out a small vial of golden powder. Her eyes pleaded with him. She wanted to cook, to show them. Ethan understood, but fear gripped him. Would they even see her gift, or would they destroy her before tasting it? Still, he stepped aside. Show them, he said quietly. The girl moved to the stove. The crowd muttered in confusion, watching as she sprinkled the glowing spice into the pan. She stirred with trembling hands. The aroma filled the air, rich and warm, carrying peace itself. The crowd hesitated. Their anger faltered as the scent wrapped around them. For a moment, they were silent, breathing in the strange comfort. The girl placed the dish on the table. She did not speak, only pushed it forward, offering her story through flavor. The tall man sneered. Tricks, he said, but his voice wavered. One of the women stepped closer, curiosity breaking her suspicion. She took a small bite. Her eyes widened. Tears welled as the flavor touched her. It feels like home, she whispered. Others shifted, uncertain. Some wanted to try. Others pulled back in fear. The tall man snarled. Don't be fooled, he barked. This is how they trick us, with softness, with lies. He grabbed the plate and hurled it to the floor. The food scattered, the smell still lingering. The girl flinched, clutching her pouch as if her heart had been thrown down. Ethan stepped forward, fury burning in his chest. Enough, he growled. His voice carried more strength than he knew. The crowd stilled. He pointed at the tall man. You call her dangerous, but what has she done? Has she raised a weapon? No, she offers food. She offers peace, and you answer with hate. His words rang through the dusty air. Maybe the danger isn't her. Maybe it's us. The crowd murmured. Some looked ashamed. Others turned away. The tall man's face twisted with anger, but he could not meet Ethan's eyes. Slowly, the people drifted back into the shadows, leaving only dust and silence behind. Ethan turned back to the girl. She stood trembling, her pouch clutched tight. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. He stepped closer, gently resting his hand on her shoulder. They don't understand, he said softly, but I do. Her lips parted, and for the first time, a clear word escaped, broken but strong. Safe, she whispered. Ethan's heart tightened. He nodded firmly. Yes, you're safe, with me. That night, the cabin felt different. The danger was not gone. Suspicion still lingered in the colony. But something had changed. The girl had tried to share her gift, and though not all saw it, one human had stood by her, and that bond now felt unshakable. The days after the confrontation were tense. Ethan noticed more eyes watching him as he walked through the colony. Whispers followed him like shadows. Some called him foolish, others called him dangerous, but he no longer cared. Every night when he returned to his cabin, the scent of her food welcomed him, and that was enough. The alien girl cooked in silence, but her silence was no longer empty. Each meal she made carried emotion, trust, and a fragile hope. Ethan ate every dish with gratitude, knowing it was more than food. It was her voice, her gift, her heart. One evening, a storm swept over the colony. Dust and lightning raged outside. The power grid flickered, leaving the streets dark. Ethan sat inside, watching the girl stir a small pot by the lantern's glow, her face calm, her hands steady. She was not afraid of the storm. A knock broke the quiet. Ethan tensed. He opened the door to find 3 colonists standing outside, faces pale in the lightning flash. Among them was the woman who had tasted the food before. Her voice shook. We need help, she said. Our children are sick. The rations are bad. They won't eat. Ethan looked back at the girl. She met his eyes, then nodded. Without a word, she gathered her pouch and stepped forward. The colonists hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes, but desperation was stronger. They led her to a small shelter where 2 children lay weak and coughing. The girl knelt beside them. She opened her pouch and carefully mixed the golden powder with the blue petals. She stirred them into a thin broth and fed the children slowly. Within minutes, the coughing eased, color returned to their faces. The parents gasped in relief, tears streaming down their cheeks. She saved them, the woman whispered, awe in her voice. Ethan stood nearby, watching with pride. I told you, he said softly. She heals. Word spread quickly. By the next day, more colonists came quietly to Ethan's cabin. Some brought their sick, others came with empty bowls, desperate for the food that carried warmth. Suspicion gave way to need, and need gave way to respect. The tall man returned too, but his anger was weaker now. He watched as a child laughed after tasting her cooking. His harsh words caught in his throat. He left without speaking, his silence louder than any threat. Inside the cabin, Ethan sat with the girl as she prepared another meal. He watched her hands move with care. He realized then that she was no longer a stranger. She had become part of his life, part of the colony. Her silence no longer marked her as weak. It made her stronger. When the meal was ready, she placed a small bowl in front of Ethan. Then, for the first time, she spoke more than one word. Her voice was soft, broken but clear. Home here. Ethan's chest tightened. He looked at her, his eyes burning with emotion. Yes, he whispered. Here is home. The girl's lips curved into a gentle smile. It was small, but it carried more meaning than any speech. For the first time in years, she felt belonging, and Ethan felt whole. Outside, the storm passed. The colony still struggled, still fought its battles. But inside that small cabin, something had changed. A human and an alien, bound not by words, but by food, trust, and heart. And in that fragile bond, they found what both had been missing all along: family.